I was 7 the night the sky filled with metal. I remember it wrong, probably. That's what old people do. We polish a memory until it shines like something it never was. But some things stay sharp no matter how many times you turn them over, and that night is one of them. We were sleeping in the long house. All of us. 200, maybe more, packed under one roof that the humans had thrown up in a single week. Thin walls, a floor that smelled of cut wood, rain drumming on a roof that didn't leak, which was a miracle we hadn't stopped being grateful for yet. My grandmother woke me by pressing her hand flat over my mouth. She didn't speak, she just pointed at the window. The stars were gone, not clouded over, gone. Something was hanging in the dark where the stars should have been, and it was moving, and it was big enough that my child's mind couldn't hold the size of it. Long shapes, dozens. They slid across the black without a sound, and their edges caught the light of the 2 moons this world had, and I saw that they were ships. My grandmother's hand was shaking against my face. "They've found us," she whispered. Her voice had a crack in it I'd never heard before, and I'd heard my grandmother's voice do a lot of things. "Sweet dark, they've found us again." That's the part I need you to understand before I tell you the rest. When we saw ships, we did not feel hope. We felt the opposite of hope. For my people, ships in the sky meant the same thing they'd meant our whole lives, that someone had come to take what little we had left, and that we would run again, and that some of us would not make it to the running. I didn't cry. I want to say that I was brave, but the truth is I was too afraid to make a sound. I lay there with my grandmother's hand over my mouth, and I watched the ships come down, and I waited for the world to end the way it always ended. It didn't end. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Let me tell you how we got there, to that floor, under that roof, on that world that was never supposed to be ours. We were called the HFY, and before the humans learned to say it, no one in this part of the galaxy had bothered to. We came from a world we called Sohen. I never saw it. It was gone before my mother was born. What I know of it, I know the way you know a song someone hummed to you when you were too young to remember the words, a warm shape with no edges. Blue seas. A sky the color of ripe fruit at evening. Cities built into the sides of cliffs so that when the tide came in it sang through the streets. The Cadron took it from us. You've never heard of the Cadron, be glad. They were not the biggest power in the galaxy, or the cruelest, or the strangest. They were something worse than any of those. They were thorough. They came to a world and they measured it, and if it had something they wanted, they took the world entire and made a note in a ledger somewhere that the taking was complete. They didn't hate us. That was the thing my grandmother could never make peace with. You can survive being hated. Hate is a fire and fire burns out. The Cadron didn't hate us. To them, we were a line item, a cost, a thing to be moved off a spreadsheet so the numbers came out clean. They wanted Sohen's oceans. Something in the water, a compound, my grandmother said, that they used to make the drives that pushed their ships between the stars. So they seeded our seas with a thing that pulled the compound out, and the pulling turned the water to poison. And in 11 years, the world that sang when the tide came in was silent and dead. My people who could get to ships got to ships. The rest stayed and did not stay long. We ran for 3 generations. Do you understand what that means? Not 3 years, 3 generations. My great-grandmother was born on Sohen. My grandmother was born on a transport ship in the black between 2 systems. My mother was born in a refugee holding station orbiting a star whose name I never learned, and I was born on that same station. And by the time I could walk, we had already been moved off it twice. We were the kind of people no one wants. Not because we were bad, because we were trouble. Taking us in meant the Cadron might notice you, and no one in that quiet, careful, frightened corner of the galaxy wanted the Cadron to notice them. Every world we drifted toward, the answer came back the same. We're sorry. We have no room. Move along. The Cadron have a claim on you, and we will not stand between you and a claim. A claim. That's what we were. property that had run off, and every civilized world in reach agreed that property should be returned, or at least not sheltered. I want you to hold onto that word. Claim. It's going to come back. We were dying out there. Slowly, the way a lamp dies when the oil runs low, not a dramatic thing, just a light getting dimmer and dimmer until one day you notice you're sitting in the dark. Our ships were failing. Our people were sick. The children born on those transports were born wrong, some of them, their bodies not made for a life with no ground under it and no sun overhead. My grandmother buried 2 of her own before I came. She never told me their names. I think saying the names out loud would have opened a door she'd nailed shut to survive. And then a ship found us that wasn't shaped like any ship we knew. I was 5 when the humans came. I remember the grown-ups gathering at the viewports, and I remember the silence of them, which frightened me more than shouting would have. My people had learned that when a strange ship approached, you went quiet and you made yourself small and you waited to find out what it wanted. This ship was ugly. I'll say that plainly because the humans themselves said it later and laughed about it. It had none of the smooth, cruel elegance of a Cadran vessel or the crystalline show of the Severid traders. It was a blunt gray brick with things bolted onto the outside of it, antennae and dishes and long booms, like someone had built a home and then kept adding rooms as they were needed. It looked, my grandmother said, like a thing made by people who cared more about whether it worked than whether it was beautiful. She meant it as an insult. She changed her mind about that later, too. They didn't demand anything. That was the first strange thing. Every other ship that had ever hailed us had opened with a demand. Identify. Submit your manifest. State your claim status. The humans opened with a question, and the question, when our old translator finally chewed through their language and spat out something we could understand, was this. Is anyone hurt over there? Do you need help? The grown-ups didn't know what to do with it. I watched my mother and the other elders argue in whispers. It had to be a trick. Nothing came for free. Kindness was bait, and behind bait there was always a hook. They'd learned that in 3 generations of learning, and they weren't wrong to have learned it. But we were dying, and a hook you can see is better than a dark you can't, so they answered honestly. Yes, we are hurt. We need everything. And the humans came aboard. I remember the first one I ever saw up close. Their kind were smaller than I expected, and softer looking, with those flat faces and those strange forward-facing eyes and skin in 100 shades of brown. This one was a woman. I learned that word later. And she came through our airlock in a suit that hissed and clicked, and the first thing she did, before she checked our ship or scanned us or asked us a single question about who we were or what we were worth, was crouch down in front of a sick child lying on a pallet by the door and put her gloved hand very gently against that child's forehead. The child was me. I don't remember being sick. I've been told I was. I remember the hand. I remember that it was warm even through the glove, or that I decided it was, which is the same thing to a 5-year-old. I remember that she looked at me and her strange flat face did something I had no word for, a crumpling around the eyes, and I found out much later that this was the human face making the shape it makes when it is sad for someone it does not know. She looked at me like I mattered. No one who wasn't Ashiri had ever looked at me like I mattered. The humans had a world. Not their home world that was far away, and full, they said, and complicated in ways they waved their hands about. But they had another world. A young colony, barely settled, out past what the old powers considered the edge of anything worth having. A green place. A place with ground and sun and rain and a sea that wasn't poison. They'd claimed it, in the way humans claim things, which I would learn was a loud and argumentative and surprisingly gentle process, and they had more of it than they were using. And they offered it to us. Just like that, as if it were nothing, as if you could just give a dying people a world. The elders didn't believe it. Of course they didn't. My grandmother stood in front of the human woman. Her name was Rel, Captain Sophia Rel, and I would love her before I understood what love was, and my grandmother said with the flat exhaustion of someone who has been lied to her whole life, "What do you want for it? Say the price. We have nothing, so say the price and let us stop pretending." And Captain Rel was quiet for a long moment. And then she said something my grandmother repeated to me so many times over the years that I can give it to you the way she gave it to me, word for word, in the human tongue and then in ours. "We don't want anything for it, that's not how. Look. I know you've got no reason to believe that. I know what's been done to you, we pulled your records, what there are of them, so I won't argue, I'll just show you. Come to Caldith. Bring everyone. If it's a trap, you'll know soon enough and you'll have lost nothing you weren't already losing. But it's not a trap, it's just a place. And there's room." Caldith, that was the name the humans had given the world. It meant nothing in their language. It was named after a man, one of the first surveyors, a man long dead. Later we gave it our own name quietly among ourselves. We called it Sohan that remains. But to the humans it was Caldith, and I'll call it that, because that's what the ships came to guard and the ships were theirs. We went, what else could we do? We were out of dark to run into. I don't have the words for the first time I stood on ground. Try to imagine it. I was 5. I had never in my life stood on a surface that wasn't a floor with dead black on the other side of it. I had never felt weight that came from a world instead of from a spinning machine pretending to be a world. I had never smelled dirt. They carried us down in shuttles, and the ramp came down, and there was light, real light, from a real sun, warm on my skin in a way the station lamps had never been. And there was a wind that smelled of green growing things and turned earth and something sweet I couldn't name, and there was a sky. A whole sky, blue going up forever, clouds in it, moving, slow and white and enormous. I fell down, not from weakness, from the sky. I looked up at that endless blue and my legs just stopped believing in me, and I sat down hard in the dirt of a world that would become my home, and I put my small hands flat against the ground and I felt it there, solid, holding me, not falling away into the dark. And I cried the way children cry with my whole body over something too big to hold. Around me the grown-ups were doing the same. 200 of us, 3 generations of running, sitting in the dirt under a blue sky, weeping into the ground. The humans stood back and let us have it. That was a kindness too, though I didn't understand it then. They didn't crowd us or film us or make it a thing. They just stood at the edge of the field, these ugly ship people with their flat faces, and they let a broken people put their hands on solid ground for the first time and fall apart about it. Some of the humans were crying too. I saw that. I didn't understand why then. I understand it now. There is a particular grief in watching someone weep at kindness, because it tells you exactly how long they went without it. That was the beginning of the good years. I have to tell you about the good years, or the rest won't mean anything. They gave us a valley, wide, green, a river through the middle of it, hills on both sides holding it like cupped hands. The humans had a settlement 1 valley over, a scrappy little town called Pharaoh's Landing, all prefab domes and greenhouses and a single crooked comms tower, and they came over the ridge every day at first to help us build. And they did help. That's what I need you to understand about the humans, the thing that took my grandmother the longest to accept. They didn't set us up and leave us to sink or swim so they could feel good about the gesture. They came, day after day, and they got dirt under their strange flat fingernails, and they taught us how to read this world. Which plants would feed us and which would make us sick. How the seasons turned here, the long warm and the short cold. How to dig a well and case it so the walls didn't fall in. How to lay a foundation that would hold through the spring floods, which we learned about the hard way. One of us and one of them both waist deep in the river at midnight hauling a child's cot to high ground while the rain came down like the sky had a grudge. There was a human named Bo who more or less adopted our whole settlement. A big man, slow-moving, with a laugh you could hear from the next hill. He'd lost people, I found out, a wife, a daughter, back on some world I never learned the name of. He didn't talk about it. But he built things for our children with his own hands, little wheeled toys and a swing that hung from the big tree by the river, and I think we filled some hole in him the way he was filling holes in us. That's how it went in the good years. We were two broken peoples, and we fit into each other's broken places, and for a while it was enough to just be less broken together. I grew up in that valley. I learned to run on solid ground. I learned to swim in a river that wanted me to live. I had human friends, a girl named Tam who was exactly my age and twice as reckless, and we got into more trouble together than the whole rest of the two settlements combined. I learned the human language until I dreamed in it. I learned that their harsh, blunt-looking ships were harsh and blunt because the people who made them had decided, somewhere along their own long road, that keeping people alive mattered more than looking good doing it. My grandmother lived to see me tall. She lived to see the first Ashiri child born on Caldith who had never known a ship, never known the dark, never known what it was to be a claim, my cousin's daughter. My grandmother held that child in her arms in the light of a real sun, and she wept, and this time it wasn't grief. I didn't have a word for what it was then. I have one now. It was safety. She wept because for the first time in 3 generations, a child of ours had been born safe. She died 2 winters after that, in a bed, in a house with a roof that didn't leak, on a world with ground under it. Old. In her sleep. Which does not sound like a triumph until you remember how the last 3 generations of my people had died, and then it sounds like the greatest victory a person could win. We buried her in the valley by the river under Bo's big tree. Bo came to the burial. He didn't say anything. He just stood at the back with his hat in his hands, that big slow man, and when it was over he put one huge palm on my shoulder, and he didn't need to say anything, and he didn't. Those were the good years. I want you to have them, because I'm about to take them away the same way they were taken from us, and I need you to feel the size of what was almost lost. The night the sky filled with metal, I was 7. No, I've told this wrong. Let me tell it right. I was 7 when I thought I saw the sky fill with metal, in that first frightened dream memory, but that was the humans arriving, the ugly gray brick and its cousins. And I've folded that fear into a night that came much later, the way old people do. The night the sky truly filled with metal, the night everything I've told you was put on the scale and weighed, I was 19. Old enough to fight, young enough to still believe, somewhere underneath, that the good years would just go on. The cadron came back. They found us the way the thorough find everything, patiently. A survey drone first. A little silver thing that drifted through the outer system and pinged once and left, and the humans caught it on their instruments and knew exactly what it meant, because they'd been watching for it for 14 years without ever telling us they were watching. That was Captain Rel's doing. She'd known, from the day she pulled our records, that this day might come. She'd spent 14 years quietly getting ready for it, and never once let us see the weight of that on her, because she didn't want us to spend 14 good years afraid. The cadron ship arrived 11 days after the drone. 1 ship, that's all they sent. That's what still makes me cold to think about. They didn't send a fleet. They didn't think they needed one. To the cadron, this wasn't a war. It was paperwork. They'd found some property that had gone missing from a ledger 3 generations ago, and they'd come to collect it. And they expected the collection to be as simple as it had always been, because in 3 generations no one had ever told them no. The ship was beautiful. I'll give them that, the way you give a blade its sharpness. Long and pale and smooth, all of a piece, no bolted-on ugliness, no seams you could see. It slid into orbit over Caldith without a sound, and it hung there, gleaming, and it sent down a message on every frequency the humans used in flawless human speech, and the message was calm and reasonable, and it turned my blood to ice. I heard it myself, we all did. They played it in the square in Pharaoh's Landing and in our valley both, because Captain Rel, who was Admiral Rel by then, though she still made everyone call her Sophia, said we had a right to hear what was being said about us. She said a people should never again have their fate decided in a room they weren't allowed into. So she let us hear it. The Cadran voice said, "To the human authority administering the world-designated Kaldith, we are the Cadran Reclamation Office. Our records indicate that a population of Ashiri stock, comprising escaped assets understanding Cadran Claim number 774 Green, is currently present on your world. This claim predates your settlement and supersedes any local arrangement. We require the immediate surrender of all Ashiri individuals and their descendants for return to Cadran administration. This is not a hostile action. It is a lawful reclamation. Compliance will be noted and appreciated. Non-compliance will require escalation, which we would prefer to avoid as escalation is expensive. You have one of your standard days to comply. We are patient, but the ledger must balance." The ledger must balance. I have hated a great many things in my long life. I have never hated anything the way I hated those 4 words in that calm, reasonable voice. The ledger must balance. 3 generations of my people ground into dust and dark, my grandmother's 2 nameless children buried in the black, a whole singing world turned to poison, and to them it was a number that hadn't been squared, a line that was still open. They came back for us the way you go back for a coin you dropped. The square went silent when the message ended, ours and theirs both. And I remember, I will always remember, that I looked at the humans around me, my friends, Tam grown tall beside me and Bo gone gray at the temples, and the young ones who'd been born the same season as our young ones. And I saw on their flat faces the thing I'd learned to read over 14 years, and it wasn't fear. It was fury. They gathered us all that night. Every human, every Ashiri, in the big meeting hall at Pharaoh's Landing that had never once held everyone at the same time. It was hot in there and close, and it smelled of 2 people's fear. And Admiral Sophia Rell stood up on a crate at the front because there was no stage, and she told us the truth. She always told us the truth, even when it cost her, especially then. She said, the Cadran ship was a heavy cruiser. She said it outgunned anything the colony had. The colony had 3 old patrol boats and a mining tug with a laser strong enough to cut rock, and that was the whole of Kaldith's defense. She said if it came to a fight right now, today, the Cadran would win, and win easily, and there was no honest way to pretend otherwise. And then she said, but it will not come to a fight right now. Because, and here she stopped, and I watched this hard woman gather herself for something, because 14 years ago, when she pulled our records and understood what we were and what was chasing us, she had made a report, not to the colony, to Earth, to the human home world, the full and complicated and argumentative place she'd waved her hand about all those years ago. She had told them, "We found a people the galaxy threw away, and something is going to come for them one day, and when it does, we are going to have to decide what kind of people we are." And Earth had argued about it. Of course they had. She told us that too. She didn't pretend humanity had been of one mind. There'd been voices, she said, powerful ones, who'd said it's not our fight, it's not our claim. We can't make enemies over strangers on the far edge of nothing. There always are those voices. Every people has them. But there'd been other voices. And 14 years ago, quietly, without ever telling us, humanity had made a decision and written it down somewhere that mattered. They'd written down that the Ashiri were under human protection. Not as property, not as a claim, as people, as residents of a human world with a human world shield over them. And a decision like that, Admiral Rell said, standing on her crate in that hot, crowded hall, her voice going rough, a decision like that isn't worth the paper it's printed on if you don't mean it when the day comes. Well, the day's come, and I sent the signal 11 days ago, the minute that drone pinged, and I want to tell you all something, and I want the Ashiri in this room to hear it most of all. She had to stop again. Sophia Rell, who I had never once seen cry, had to stop and press the back of her hand to her mouth. The fleet's coming, she said. Earth is sending the fleet. They've been coming for 11 days and they'll be here before the Cadron deadline runs out. You are not going to be surrendered. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. I gave you a world 14 years ago and I told you it wasn't a trap, and by God I am going to make that the truth if it's the last thing I do. Nobody is taking you back into the dark. Nobody. That's all I've got. That's everything I've got. The hall was silent for one heartbeat. And then my people, my quiet, careful, 3 generations of learning to make themselves small people, my people made a sound I had never heard us make. It started low from the elders, the ones old enough to have been born in the dark, and it rose, and it wasn't a cheer, it wasn't anything so simple as a cheer. It was the sound of a people who had been told no their entire existence, who had heard move along, and we have no room, and the claim supersedes from every world they ever drifted toward hearing. For the first time in living memory, someone stand up and say no, you can't have them, they're mine and I will fight you for them. Tam grabbed my hand in the noise. She was crying. Reckless Tam, who I'd never seen cry either. She squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, and she shouted something at me over the sound of 2 peoples coming apart at the seams, and I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I looked around that hall, at the humans and the Ashiri all tangled up together, weeping and shouting and holding onto each other, and I understood something that has never once left me in all the long years since. We were not a claim anymore. We were home. The next day was the longest of my life. The Cadron cruiser hung in the sky, pale and patient, and its deadline ticked down, and we waited. The humans put their 3 old patrol boats and their mining tug up into orbit anyway. A gesture. Everyone knew it was a gesture. 4 small, ugly boats squaring up against a thing that could have swatted them without slowing down. But they went up. Because Admiral Rell said a shield you're not willing to raise isn't a shield, and if the fleet didn't make it in time, then the colony would stand between the Cadron and us with whatever it had, and that was the end of the discussion. Bo was on one of those patrol boats. He'd been colonial militia in his youth, before he lost his family, before he came out to the edge of nothing to build swings for other people's children. He came to say goodbye to us before he went up. He didn't call it goodbye. He said, I'll see you after. But he came to the valley, that big, slow, gray-templed man, and he went around to every one of us, and he put his huge hand on each of our shoulders the way he had at my grandmother's burial, and he didn't say much, because Bo never did. To me he said, you watch the sky tonight, kid. You watch the whole thing. Whatever happens up there, you were worth it, all of you. Don't you ever let anybody tell you different. Then he got in a shuttle and went up to sit in an old patrol boat and wait to die for us, if it came to that. It didn't come to that. Because that night, 3 hours before the Cadron deadline ran out, the sky filled with metal. And this time I was awake, and I was 19, and I understood exactly what I was seeing, and I have never in my life been so afraid and so unafraid at the same moment. They came out of the dark above Caldith all at once, the way a held breath comes out. I was standing in the valley with what felt like every soul on the planet. Nobody could sleep, so nobody tried, and we'd all drifted out under the open sky to wait together, humans and Ashiri, thousands of us spread across the hills with our faces turned up. And the stars went out in patches, the way they had in my folded child memory, and I heard the old fear rise in the throats of the elders around me. That reflex 3 generations deep, ships, they've found us. And then the ships turned on their lights. The Cadron ship had come in dark and silent, gleaming and cold, a blade held to our throat. The human fleet did the opposite. They came in loud. They lit themselves up like a festival, running lights and floods and great sweeping beacons, so that there could be no mistake, no confusion, no chance in the dark that anyone would think they were sneaking. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the Cadron to see them, and they wanted us to see them. And most of all, I think of this often, I think they wanted to make sure that not one single Ashiri looking up at that sky would feel, even for a heartbeat, the old dread of ships arriving unannounced. So they came in blazing. They came in like they were proud. And they were enormous. I had thought the ugly gray brick that first found us was big. These made it look like a rowboat. They were mountains. They were moving mountains hung with light, and they were ugly the way everything the humans built was ugly, all bolted on brutal function, no elegance, no show. And they were the most beautiful thing I have ever seen or will ever see, and I say that as an old creature who has seen a great deal. There were 40 of them. 40 warships, for 200 Ashiri and their descendants on a colony world at the edge of nothing. Earth had sent 40 warships, across who knows how much dark, at who knows what cost, to stand between one pale, patient cruiser and a people the whole galaxy had agreed weren't worth the trouble. They didn't fire. That's the part the galaxy would talk about afterward in the years that followed, when this story got out and got big and changed a few things about how the old careful powers thought about the humans. The fleet didn't fire a shot. They came in blazing with light, and they took up a position between the Cadran cruiser and the planet deliberately, unmistakably, 40 mountains of metal forming a wall across the sky with our world behind them, and then they just stopped. And they waited. And they let the wall speak for itself. Because a wall like that doesn't need to say anything. The lead ship hailed the cruiser. On open channels, again, Admiral Rel's insistence that we all had a right to hear our own fate decided. So they piped it down to the square and the hills, and the whole of Caldith stood in the dark under 40 burning ships and heard a human voice speak to the Cadran. I don't know who it was. Some fleet commander, some name that never got famous. Her voice was flat and tired, the voice of someone who had crossed a great deal of dark and would rather have been sleeping, and she said, "Cadran Reclamation Vessel, this is the Earth Defense Fleet Caldith Station. We have received your claim, we've reviewed it. The answer is no." A pause. The Cadran voice, still calm, still reasonable, still that terrible patient thing, came back. "Human fleet. Claim 774 Green is lawful and predates your settlement. Your intervention constitutes interference in a Cadran administrative matter. We do not wish conflict. We ask again for compliance. The ledger. The ledger must balance. Yeah, we heard you the first time." The human commander's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, if anything, and somehow that was worse. "Here's the thing. We heard your whole message. We heard the part where you said this isn't hostile, it's just lawful reclamation, just paperwork, just squaring an account. And I want to make sure you understand something, so we don't have a misunderstanding out here in the dark, because misunderstandings this far from home get expensive for everybody. Are you receiving me clearly?" "We are receiving." "Good, then receive this. The people you came for are citizens of a human world under human protection. Full stop. I don't care about your claim number. I don't care that it's older than our settlement. I don't care that every other power in this arm of the galaxy handed them back to you or shut the door in their faces for 3 generations. We're not those powers. We looked at your ledger and your claim and your lawful reclamation, and we decided we don't recognize any law that turns people into a line item you get to come collect. So there's no compliance coming. There's no negotiation coming. There's just us, and this wall, and your one ship, and a very simple question." Another pause, 40 ships burning in the dark, the whole of a world holding its breath. "The question is, how much is balancing that ledger worth to you?" I have thought about that moment for the rest of my life, the sheer, staggering nerve of it. One tired human voice telling the machine that had ground my people into dust for 3 generations, "Make it make sense to me. Do the math. You came here treating us like an accounting problem. Fine, let's do accounting. Is 1 dead people worth the price of 40 warships between you and them? Run the numbers. We'll wait." The Cadran were thorough. That was the whole of what they were. And a thorough people, faced with 40 warships and a colony that would not yield, and a war that would cost more than any amount of drive compound could ever be worth, did the one thing their entire nature demanded. They ran the numbers. And the numbers said no. The pale ship hung there for a long time. Long enough that people started to cry in the dark on the hills, not knowing which way it would break. Long enough that Tam found my hand again and held it, and I held it back, and neither of us breathed. Then the Cadron voice came one last time. Still calm, still to the very end reasonable. That was the most chilling thing about them, that they never once got angry, never once raised their voice, because to be angry you have to care, and they never cared about us at all. Human fleet, your position is noted. Claim 774 green will be marked as contested and referred for review. We withdraw pending reassessment. And then, after a pause, for the record, this population represents an outstanding balance of 3.2 Cadron centuries. You are choosing to absorb that cost. We wish you to understand that the cost does not disappear because you have chosen to bear it. The ledger does not forgive. It only transfers. The human commander was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing that I had carved into the stone at the head of my grandmother's grave, in the old script of Sohan that almost no one living can still read. She said, "Good, transfer it to us, we'll carry it. That's what people do." And the pale ship turned, smooth and silent and cold to the last, and it slid back up into the dark from which it had come, and the stars came back where it had been. The Cadron never returned, not in my lifetime, not in my children's. I understand, from the traders who pass through now, that they eventually marked claim 774 green as permanently uncollectible and closed the account, which in their language is the nearest thing to surrender that a people like that can express. They squared us off their books at last, not because they gave us up, but because the cost of us finally outran the worth of us. We were, at the very end, too expensive to be property. I have never heard a sweeter thing said about my people. The hills didn't erupt when the pale ship left. That's not what happened, and I won't pretty it up. What happened was quieter, and it broke me more thoroughly than any cheer could have. What happened was that a sound went across those dark hills, thousands of people, two peoples, exhaling all at once, and then beginning, softly, to weep. Not the sharp weeping of grief. The deep, bottomless, body-shaking weeping of a fear so old and so heavy that you'd forgotten you were carrying it until the moment it was finally set down. My people wept the way you weep when you've been running your whole life and someone finally tells you that you can stop, that you're allowed to stop, that the door behind you is closed and locked and guarded, and nothing is coming through it, and you can lie down in the grass under a sky that will not fall on you and simply rest. 3 generations. 3 generations of running, and it ended not with a battle but with a wall of light and one tired voice saying the answer is no. Bo came down out of the sky an hour later. His patrol boat had sat up there the whole time, one of 4 little ugly boats behind 40 enormous ones, ready to die and not needing to. He came down and he walked into our valley in the gray before dawn, still in his flight suit, that big slow man, and he found me where I was sitting by the river under his big tree, next to my grandmother's grave. He sat down beside me. His knees cracked. He was getting old. We sat there in the wet grass and watched the sky go pale, the ordinary pale of an ordinary dawn on an ordinary world that would go on being ours. After a while he said, "Told you to watch the sky." "I watched it," I said. "Good," he said, and then after a long time, "You know what I kept thinking, up there, while we sat waiting to find out if we were gonna fight?" "What?" He was quiet. The river ran. Somewhere upstream a bird I didn't have a name for was starting up its morning noise. "I kept thinking about my little girl," Bo said. "The one I lost. She'd have been about your age now, and I kept thinking I couldn't save her. Wasn't anything I could have done, it was a sickness, it was quick. There wasn't a fight to be had. And I've carried that for 20 years, that there wasn't a fight, that I didn't get to stand between her and the thing that took her." He looked at me. His flat human eyes were wet. "And then here's all you, and here's a thing coming to take you. And this time there was a fight to be had. This time I got to stand up. I got to be the wall. Even if all I was one little boat behind 40 big ones, I got to be part of the wall. He put his huge hand on my shoulder, one last time the way he had at the burial. You gave me that. Don't you understand? I keep hearing folks say Earth took you in like we did you some big favor. But you gave us something back we didn't even know we needed. You gave us somebody to stand up for. That's not charity going one direction, kid. That's just what people are supposed to be to each other. Both ways. All the way down. I didn't have anything to say to that. I was 19, and I had just watched my whole world be saved, and I didn't have the words. So I did the human thing, the thing they taught us without ever meaning to teach it. Over 14 years of getting dirt under their fingernails helping us build a home. I leaned over, and I put my head on that big man's shoulder, and I let him hold me while the sun came up over a world that no one was ever going to take away from us again. I'm very old now. Bo's gone. Tam's gone. She lived a long, full, reckless life and went out laughing, which is exactly how she'd have wanted it. Admiral Sophia Rell is gone too. There's a statue of her in the square at Pharaoh's Landing, and every year on the day the fleet came, the whole planet gathers around it, humans and Ashiri both, and we tell the story. This story, the one I'm telling you now. The children think it's an adventure tale, the wall of light, the 40 ships, the one tired voice saying the answer is no, and it is that. It's a good story and it deserves to be told as one. But I'm old, and I've had a long time to turn it over, and I want to tell you the part underneath the part, before I'm gone and there's no one left who stood on those hills that night. The wall of 40 warships wasn't the miracle. Don't misunderstand me, it was magnificent, and it saved us, and I'll love those ugly ships until I die. But warships are just warships. Any people with enough metal can make a wall in the sky. The miracle came 14 years earlier. The miracle was a woman in a hissing suit crouching down in front of a sick child on a pallet by an airlock, before she checked our ship or scanned us or asked what we were worth, and putting her warm gloved hand against that child's forehead and letting her strange flat face crumple with sorrow for a stranger. The miracle was that somebody looked at a people the whole galaxy had agreed weren't worth the trouble, and decided we were worth the trouble. Everything else, the world, the valley, the good years, the fleet, the wall, the answer is no, all of it grew from that. From one person deciding a stranger's pain was real. The warships were just what that decision looked like, 14 years later, when it finally had to be big enough to be seen from the ground. That's the thing I want the children to understand underneath the adventure. Earth didn't save us because Earth had a fleet. Earth had a fleet because, somewhere along their own long, hard road, enough of them had decided that people are people, all the way down, both directions, and that you stand between the ones you love and the dark, and you do the math on the ledger. And if the math says the cost is too high, you pay it anyway, because some things don't go on a ledger at all. We call this world Sohen that remains among ourselves, but I've come to think that's not quite right. Sohen is gone. It's saying when the tide came in and now it's silent and poisoned and 3 generations dead, and no wall of ships will ever bring it back. This world isn't the one we lost. It's the one we were given. By people who owed us nothing, who'd never heard our name, who looked up one day and saw a light going dim in the dark and decided, for no reason, for no profit, against the advice of their own careful voices, to go and see if anyone over there needed help. So here's how I end it, every year at the foot of Sophia Rell's statue, with the whole planet listening, and the young ones not quite understanding yet, and the old ones understanding all too well. They say Earth took us in. They did. But that's only half of it, because taking someone in is easy in the good years, when it costs you nothing but a little room and a little kindness. Anyone can be generous when it's cheap. The other half came the night the sky filled with metal, when it stopped being cheap, when there was a bill to pay and a claim to answer, and a patient cold voice saying the ledger must balance. And Earth looked at the price of keeping us, the price of standing between us and the dark one more time, the price that every other world in the galaxy had refused to pay for 3 generations. And Earth paid it, without blinking. 40 ships and one tired voice, and the answer is no. Earth took us in. And then when it counted, Earth kept us. That's the whole story. That's the only part that ever mattered. And I have spent a long, safe, sunlit life. A life my grandmother, born in the dark between 2 stars, could not even have imagined trying to be worth it. I hope I have been. Watch the sky tonight, little one. The whole thing. Blue going up forever, and not one thing in it that means us harm. You were worth it. All of us were. Don't you ever let anybody tell you different.